Upfront and Outspoken with Bob Williams. If you love the Constitution,
man is not free unless government is limited.
If you love freedom,
as government expands, liberty contracts.
If you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe America is still the greatest nation on earth, then get ready for an experience you'll never forget. This is Upfront and Outspoken. Here's your host, Bob Williams.
And welcome back. This is Upfront Outspoken. I'm your host, Bob Williams, on this day after Thanksgiving, otherwise known as Black Friday. You know, as I said, I was going to get Jonathan Wolfman on. He is with us. Right now, I've got his mic turned down, so you can't hear him for a moment. And what I want to talk to Jonathan about is we have heard so much of what has been going on in Ferguson, you know, with all the riots and all of that, and I want to get Jonathan's opinion about this. To how it's going to hurt the community financially. You know, get his impressions about what is going on there and everything else. Good morning, Jonathan. I thank you for taking this hour.
My pleasure, Bob. Good morning to everybody out there from a very, very chilly but sunny Washington, D.C.
Well, believe it or not, we're going to be warming up here. You're going to hate me because Saturday and Sunday we're in the 70s.
Oh, my gosh.
now, Jonathan, yesterday, I got to thank you again for coming on, being part of the panel with IQ Al Razuli. It was a very interesting conversation. But I want to talk to you today more about, we've heard, ever since the Darren Wilson was not indicted, we had the riots over there, and I just got an update on a few things, and one of them is 12 businesses were basically totally vandalized or burnt to the ground. Now, I also heard from CNN and a few other sources that one business found out they lost or are losing 80% of their business, another one 60% of their business, and the ones that are burned down, obviously, 100% of their business is gone. And I want to get your impression of how you think that kind of, violence is going to affect the community as a whole. So, give me what you feel about that.
Oh, I think that if anything is going to change the trajectory of a response to the kind of feeling of having been done to as a community, it will be a relatively small town or first-ring suburb, which I think Ferguson is. St. Louis is one of course, a first-ring suburb of St. Louis, although it's a city in itself. If anything is going to change people's sense of, I'm so outraged that I have to take it out in these ways, it will be these people who have lost so much being a constant reminder of this is all you get. When you respond that way, the anger may be understandable. That's not what we're debating now. I don't think that's what Bob is asking us to consider. I think what Bob is asking us to consider is that even if outrage is understandable, even if, let's say the district attorney acted in ways which was very unusual, which is true, even if the district attorney seemed to be acting on behalf of Officer Darren Wilson and not as he's traditionally supposed to act on behalf of the murdered party or killed party, I should say, this kind of reaction is going to be a poke in the eye, not for a day, not for a week, but ongoing and perhaps for the better part of the next year, until whatever insurance these business people have are going to make the situation at least more livable.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the thing is like I said, we had heard one business has already said that they have lost 60% of their business, another one 80%. The businesses that are burned down 100%. So it's going to take quite some time for some of these businesses to recover. And my concern is because of the acts of a few, and I'm going to leave it at that, because of the acts of a few, although they're under investigation, they're getting all kind of video and everything else to try to find the responsible parties. These are mom and pop stores, except like Walgreens or a couple other ones, but for the vast majority, these are mom and pop businesses who depend on that community for their personal livelihood. And, if you look at it statistically, for every $1 that these businesses, these local businesses have generated, it adds up to maybe $30, $40, $50 that's, has this ripple effect. Now, with 12 businesses now out, I mean, this to me, the whole tax base that supported the community for, roads and, stoplights, for protection, for fire departments, is now going to be affected, not just for the next, year, but in years to come.
That's probably true, and we don't know, of course, what kinds of insurance that of these stores carried. Some of them may well see better days more quickly because of insurance, but one of the things we haven't even raised is that these stores were employers. These people in that community almost certainly lost jobs over this.
Yeah, exactly.
They lost, and talk about an income base, talk about a tax base. If they lost businesses, a whole bunch of jobs that are countless are going to be lost or are lost.
Well, exactly. In fact, one business, a restaurant in particular that I've seen, he had initially employed, I believe it was 17 or 18 people. And because of what happened, he is now down to a staff of 6. And he said right out, he's not even certain if he'll ever be able to get the remaining 11 back. And it astonishes me that nobody has in mainstream media has addressed the after effect of these riots. They're focusing on the damage, they're focusing on the rioters, but they're not focusing or have not yet paid any attention to the human effect on this.
Yeah, and I think that's likely because if Bill Smith loses his job at such and such a store, that's not a very good photograph. And you know and I know that media go for what looks interesting, like a burned down store or a store with its window fronts bashed out, a car that's overturned or set on fire. But the more, in a way, what I think I hear Bob saying, people, is that even more compelling than a building, even though it's, photogenic when a building's, reduced to ash, the fact is the real human story is those 11 people who now are thinking, wait, well, do I have to talk to an attorney to figure out if I'm going to get workman's comp? Well, wait a minute, maybe this is not covered by workman's comp. What am I going to do? I was thinking of buying my nephew Billy and Sue, some really cool Christmas presents. Is that out the window? These are the real human stories that, as Bob is saying, mainstream media, again, you don't have a very flashy photo, but that's really where if you will, where the flash is.
Exactly. And the thing, you brought up a very interesting point. You focused on one person, and let's say, to give people a perspective of exactly what happened. Let's say, this gentleman that owns this restaurant cannot hire these 11 people back. So we're going to round it out to 10. Let's say, for example, every one of those people, made $200 a week. All right, that's $2,000 a week. That's lost for these people. Okay, that's $2,000 a week, $8,000 a month. That's it. This guy can't get it back. Now you multiply that by the 12 businesses that are totally out. So now you have, $8,000 a month for one business. I mean, obviously there's going to be other businesses that have had more, a couple less, but that's $8,000 initial income that would have came into the spending pool, as we shall say. People have to pay rent. Well, the owner of the building has to hire, plumbers, electricians if something goes wrong. And all of this, plus they go out and they got to buy groceries, Christmas, and, all this is coming up. So now you can start to imagine the ripple effect this is going to have, because those people, are going to make cutbacks. They're going to cut way back on things because they have to. They're going to be set on maybe from $200 a week to maybe $125 that if they qualify for workman's comp. So what happened in Ferguson is going to have this ripple effect, and I seriously doubt they're going to get out of this hole, even within a year.
Oh, I think that's right. If these people, if we see the camera crews come back in mid to late November of 2015 and want to do, on-camera interviews, and you'll see some businesses back. But even if they're all physically back, and that's why I stress so much the difference between what makes a flashy picture for news coverage and what is actually real, there will be people whose lives are permanently negatively affected by this, and it's unfortunate that I'm betting, audience, in the world of media that you listen to, I'm just hoping that it's more than just Bob and me who is recognizing that this is a remarkable risk that people take when they simply feel that their anger is such that it explodes like that. I'm not denying that there's reason to have extraordinary anger. I'm not denying that. I'm saying that when you have that go-to, if that's the go-to, it is so unfortunately lasting in ways that the people who are doing it would never have suspected.
I agree with that. The thing is the lasting effects of what is going on, and you brought up the issue of people being frustrated and angry. I can understand that side of all this, but my question during this entire episode over the last several days has been, where were their heads? I mean, for that moment, yes, I am angry, I am upset, I've got to do something, but a long time before then, there has been a call out for calm, collectiveness, creativity. Let's channel this somewhere else. It seems that that part of people's conscience or people's, whatever you want to call it, just evaporated and it erupted in this chaos. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, my sense is that it shows you, you see, what you're saying is so reasonable, but I think it shows us how unreasonable the norm is. I'm not saying it's good to be unreasonable. It's almost never good to be unreasonable. But I'm saying that when people have felt the way these people have felt, and then they are poked in the eye, I think they felt poked in the eye by a guy whose elected office, from their point of view, and frankly from mine too, was to protect the interests of the state and not the accused, then what you have is an entire community feeling outrage and a small percentage of the community not having the maturity, not having the, frankly, the sack to just hold back and to say, what's the best way to respond that isn't going to harm ourselves? And you always have a small percentage in virtually any community that is just going to feel the need to explode.
I'm going to draw on your psyche, so to speak. And I kind of want to get your impression on this. Why would something that happened in Ferguson, why would that affect people in Los Angeles, Oakland, elsewhere around the country where breakouts have occurred, demonstrations, riots, there's been several arrests in both of those two cities I mentioned. Why would something in Ferguson affect people in LA, people in New York?
It's a really good question, and especially when you consider that Bob is not asking why would something in Houston affect LA or New York. He's not asking why would something in Philadelphia, these large cities that we hear in the news all the time. Here we have Ferguson, Missouri, and you and I mean all our audience, you guys and Bob and I all know that unless you live in the Southwest, certainly for those of us who live here in the Northeast part of the United States, we never heard of Ferguson before this shooting. We never heard of it. So the question is a very valid one, and I'll try to answer it in a second. Why in the world would someone in Chicago or LA or New York look at some clearly relatively small area like Ferguson and act like this? I think it's because the experiences of minority peoples are not remarkably different in our urban settings, in our semi-urban and urban settings, that they all have felt the pinch from authorities who they have felt are really not on their side, even to the extent that the process will be fair. And so what explodes across the country, as far away as Oakland or as far away as, LA, New York, my God, New York is so far from Ferguson, Missouri. But what explodes is the sense that, well, that almost happened here when my cousin Joe was in a bad situation. Or we've heard stories growing up for generations of the police being supported, this corrupt cop being stood up for by the authorities. And I think that, you see, while it happened in Missouri, while it happened in Ferguson, I think the sense in these communities is that here we all are, from a sense of solidarity, here we all are being done to yet again by a corrupt system.
Well, the thing is when you're talking about a corrupt system there, Jonathan, maybe I can't understand this. Okay, way back when I was growing up, during the initial civil rights movements, we seen the demonstrations. We heard about crooked cops. We heard about the brutality. We heard about all this. It went on in the 60s, went on in the 70s, went on in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. This has been going on well over 50 years, well over 50 years. And yet it seems that if you look at a overall prospectus of this, nothing has changed. And I fear that it's going to be ongoing. Is there anything we can do to stop this? Or do you feel there's really nothing we can do? This is just the way it is.
Well, I'll tell you this. This is a little thing, and it really is a Band-Aid. But I know this. My son, for example, is friends because he's a marksman. Because my son is a really good marksman, he has friends a lot of whom are cops, and some of his friends, since we live in southern Maryland, right outside D.C., we're not that far from Virginia, and the laws in Maryland and Virginia are rather interesting and different, and I won't go all into that. But what my son's telling me in response to the Ferguson situation is that the cops that he knows in Northern Virginia, they would be delighted to wear the GoPros. The little cameras that show what you're doing,
right,
on their cars and on their persons. And yet we know that there are cops across the country and whole departments who say, oh, we're not going to touch that stuff. But, my son is a very interesting guy. He's African American, and he is a moderate. He likes to call himself a political moderate. Much more moderate than I am, for example. And yet he says to me, you can really tell a cop who at least wants to try to be fair if he's willing, for example, to consider wearing a GoPro. Those cops who say, oh no, I wouldn't touch anything like that. I don't want to be on view. Then you see a minority community says, see, they just want to get away with crap.
Well, I agree with that given the technology today, that the police departments need to be held accountable. And I agree with the fact that they should all be wearing this body cam. I agree with that 100%. And like you said, those cops that, well, I don't want that thing. I don't want anybody knowing what I'm doing. Well, that should be an automatic red flag to that department that this cop may not be the guy he's supposed to be. He's not the type of guy that's going to go out there, serve, protect. He may bend the rules, break the rules. Those are the kind of cops you need to get off the force right away. You don't want to wear the body cam, you're out of here. That's my opinion. In that way, I agree that it would help. It would help eliminate a lot of the problems. But here again, though, even though you may be able to have control on the officers and things that are going on are going to be seen, they're going to be made available, will that quell the still underlying current of the frustrations that people feel? If another Michael Brown incident comes up where it happens in Timbuktu, and people in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, they rile up. It's never made any sense to me that an incident in small town America has such a wide array, of feelings across the nation. I guess I can't grasp how small town incidents has this global effect.
I think part of the reason that that happens is because even though, yes, there are still small town and nominally suburban America, we are all so interconnected by media now. that when a community sees something going on in another community, and they can relate it to something happening in themselves, and when it's news 24/7, I think the distinctions that you and I grew up with about what is small town and what is large city, I think some of those distinctions go away. But let's for example go back to that GoPro, and by no means do I think that that's the quickie answer of the month forever, etc. It's not, but it's something. But let's look at that for a sec. If Darren Wilson had been wearing a GoPro, and if wearing a GoPro had been official business and the way to do things in Ferguson, we would not have had any of this. And the reason we would not have had any of this, I think, is pretty clear, and that is this. Wearing that kind of thing, the accusations would have flown. People would have said, wait a minute, he murdered our child. The government could have said, all right, let's look into this. Let's look at the video. It's I was watching my beloved Eagles thrash my hated Cowboys last night. Yay, thank God. Anyway, the point is, you have instant replay. Do you want two guys with two different colored jerseys arguing with the men in stripes, in black stripes, the refs, arguing forever, or do you want some kind of going under the hood and looking? That's what this is. What would happen if you didn't have going under the hood in football? You'd have constant argument. What that does is it ends the argument.
I agree with you that the camera would give immediate access to some type of closure. But you brought up something very interesting here, Jonathan. You brought up something about the media and the 24/7 news. In instances such as this, are we as the media as much responsible for the reactions of the public we serve?
That's such a good question, because, I wonder the degree to which because everything is pictures, because the media, the 24/7 media, knows that people just don't want to listen, don't want to process. I've heard you so many times on your show, and you are so right. Really ask the public to think, to analyze, to bring facts and theories and opinions to bear before you jump to conclusions. What works against that so much is local and regional and national news just wanting to throw pictures at us and then basically saying, okay, you work it out, but we're going to give you such a compelling picture and analysis. I don't know if you agree with what I'm about to say, but I think when you and I were a lot younger, I think there was a sense on the part of news people, even local, that they had to try to work with an audience to analyze and figure out, well, what is it we have here? What are we looking at? I think there's such a reliance on the explosive kind of photo that they think their job is done once they've shown us those explosive photos.
I agree. When I was growing up, we had guys like Huntley Brinkley, we had Walter Cronkite, I can't remember who else it was, Edward R. Murrow, and the thing is when they came out and did the news, not only did they give you the headlines, what happened, but they also gave you a breakdown, and for people, to put it simply, they gave you an analysis as to, what happened, why it happened. It was covered in more detail. Today, I notice on all mainstream, it's like, here's what happened, next story.
That's exactly right. And here's the other thing. People might be listening to what you and I say now, are saying now to them, and say, but wait a minute, we hear analysis all the time on the news. But I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, here's the difference. The difference is that in the era Bob is just talking about, those guys, Edward R. Murrow, Huntley, and Brinkley, you didn't have to love them, but what they did is when they gave analysis, you knew they were trying damned hard to try to give as an objective analysis as possible, even though knowing none of us can be completely objective. We all knew, watching those televisions, that they were trying really hard. But when you have a Fox News and when you have an MSNBC, when you already know that it's going to be a right-wing analysis or a more left-wing analysis, what happens is, what I really wish that Fox and MSNBC would figure out once and for all is that when they get that predictable, they're no longer doing a newsman's job, but they're simply entertaining.
And that's it. You hit it right there on the head, Jonathan. And you nailed it. And I've been stressing this on my shows time and time again.
You have. I've heard you say this in different words.
And the thing is in today's media, if you've ever noticed, a lot of the newscasts, you get this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, big-boobed gal there reading a teleprompter. So she's never been in the trenches, so to speak. She has no clue where, Timbuktu is, or she might not even know where, Sioux Falls, Minnesota is. She might not even know any of that. But back in the day, with Edward R. Murrow, with Walter Cronkite, with Huntley Brinkley, these guys were in the trenches, and they did everything they could, and I follow in that genre, so to speak, where no matter what I may politically think, no matter how my political beliefs are, that is not what I'm there for. I am not to voice that side of me. I'm there to give you the news in the most unbiased and informational way as possible. That's not the case today.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, everybody listening to you and to me right now knows more or less what our general politics are. Everybody knows. Everybody knows where I am generally, but I think everybody also knows that the reason KKRP, the reason Starcom, the reason Bob and the crew, we all are a little different, is because you know us, and you know that we, regardless of our point of view, we're trying really hard to get somewhere beyond a predetermined point of view. One of the reasons, look, I'm on the left. Everybody knows that. Okay, fine. And I could defend that. But when I turn on MSNBC, you know what ends up happening? I'm bored. And the reason I'm bored is the same reason I'm bored when I turn on Fox. Because it's exactly what they're doing is not what Bob Williams and I grew up with.
Exactly. And this is why I'm saying, are we not, as media, somewhat culpable to what happens, like in Ferguson, to what happens out in L.A., to what happens in Oakland, Brooklyn, all these areas since the Michael Brown shooting, since the recent events of no indictment, and then the subsequent riots. Are we as media somewhat not? I want to say we need to take responsibility for what we put on the air, and it seems today these guys are just throwing it out there, letting it happen, and then you get the riots, then you get this. Are we not as media to be held accountable for our words as well?
I wish so. I don't see it. I mean, we know that fewer and fewer large corporations own more and more of the daily newspapers. We know that fewer and fewer large corporations own more and more of the non-print media. And I think what ends up happening when as a result of that sometimes is the need to just get numbers and not worry about how much integrity your news broadcast has. And the fudging of the line the fudging of the line between news and analysis, and hi, we're here to entertain you, and we're here to stoke your flames. Even when I just said stoke your flames, I didn't even realize for the second that I was in fact mirroring what happened in Ferguson. And I'm not blaming the media for what happened at Ferguson, but I am saying that Bob is dead on right, that it contributes to this kind of irresponsible way we look at what happens in our world.
Yeah, I agree. I just can't, get it through my, get it out there. I don't want to say get it through my head, because it is in my head. I just can't get it out there enough to our listeners that even though we as journalists are protected under the First Amendment, we need to also be extra careful in how we approach things. Jonathan brought up Fox, he brought up MSNBC. CBS is the same way, NBC is the same way, ABC is the same way. All the major media, they're owned by just a few, just a few. And this stretches out to Clear Channel, Viacom, Disney. They're only a few companies own what we know as news. So what they've done, they've turned it into entertainment. That's not the way it should be. We should be held to a higher pedestal, I want to say, a higher pedestal than you're, watching whatever, But it seems that we're stirring up the pot every time something like this in Ferguson comes up. You see the images, you see, this going on, and you hear, like, even lately, and I'm going to say it, even lately on Democracy Now, when it was going on, you heard the radicalized people talking. You didn't hear from the average guy. You heard about these guys that are all riled up. You didn't hear from that. There's no truth in media anymore as far as mainstream is concerned.
And if I may say this, and I hope this doesn't take us in a very wrong direction, but it's one of the reasons I was so impressed with the discussion with IQ Razuli yesterday, and I hope a lot of you out there heard us, because we had people as part of our panel discussion who were, in fact, not in the media, not writers, not broadcasters, but ordinary citizens. And Bob, you see, this is what I think, I'm so impressed when Bob brings you these kinds of things, because he's so keen on bringing you a voice that is so similar to the non-professional newsman's voice.
Well, I thank you for that compliment. I'll write it up on my resume.
No, but it's quite true.
Well, I'll send you the check in a couple of days. No, seriously. The thing is, I try, I follow in the footsteps of Edward R. Murrow and all that. I'm not going to say I don't, because I truly believe that in order to get rationality, you need balance. And without that balance, you are tipping the scales in one way, and then you're going to have people get angry, like what we've seen, by the media being there and highlighting, all this violence. I think myself, they were actually adding fuel to the fire. If they had said, look, the second we see this stuff, we're not going to air it now. We'll wait 6 months, a year, whatever. But we're not going to put this out on the screen now. We want the real people. We want the ones that are being affected, not the ones in the riot, but we want the ones on the outside of this. How is this affecting you with what's going on downtown?
Yeah, and I think, again, it's I hate to beat a dead horse here, but I think it's because you say, is that all you got? Photographs? I've got a frog in my throat. Sorry, guys. But is that all you got? Pictures of buildings tumbling in flames? And I have a feeling that the answer is, yeah, that's all we got. We can't do straight analysis anymore. We can't do straight reporting anymore. And some of them, and when we do what we call reporting, it's either from the very far right or rather far left, because we know what our sponsors want to sponsor, and getting the average ordinary individual's take on what's going on, well, to hell with that.
You know, the thing is I was thinking just a moment ago, and it just came to me. I think a lot of it has to do with going back several years. I mean, for Jonathan and me, we'll remember this. But for many of our audience, who are the younger audience, they'll have no clue what I'm talking about. It seems that we focused on the pictures, as you say, more so after, it started to make that transformation right after the Watts riot. We saw a little bit more and a little bit more. But by the time it came to Rodney King, it seems from that moment on, that was all that was focused on. The violent acts, the pictures, as you say. It made the transition starting after the Watts riot, but I think from the time of Rodney King on, everyone says, "Hey, let's get it entertainment. Let's just get this violence out there. Let's just get these people riled up," and then add to this. A lot of people sit at home and play video games. Now, I'm not associating, video games to what's going on, but in this day and age, this is what we have. Rodney King, that was a person recorded it, and then now you've got the cell phones, boom, instantaneous. We can put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, Instagram, whatever the hell they want to put it on, and then it goes viral. Where is the sense of responsibility with these people?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a world where young people, and I hate to say, I'm an old guy and, damn young people. I don't mean that at all. I love young people. I was a teacher for, upwards of 40 years. But the fact is, when you can get instantly so damned popular by putting a picture of your girlfriend's torso on YouTube and get 300,000 hits in a week or less, how is anybody supposed to know what's the difference between that after you've gotten so much adulation for that and maybe even making some money off of doing that? How is anybody anymore supposed to know the difference between news that is straight news, good analysis, and all this exploitative nonsense?
Yeah. I mean, people are more inclined to watch somebody put a champagne glass on Kim Kardashian's butt than, what is going on in downtown blue-collar America, and in the age of instance, I don't want to say fame, I want to say infamy. When these people record this, sometimes what they are recording is, the after effect, but you don't know what happened up to that point. Sometimes you do, sometimes we see it, but I just can't get it through my audience's heads at times that there's always two sides to every coin. I don't care if it's a video, I don't care if it's a testimony, I don't care what it is, but it seems, there's always two sides to every coin. And what is going on today is concentrated on the bad side of the coin, but not on its after effects. Am I right or wrong in that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the corollary to that is this. If some 22-year-old or 24-year-old or even 30-year-old gets extraordinary props for putting up some dopey, kind of vaguely sexualized video on YouTube, and everybody's watching it, and it even makes the local news that so-and-so put up something about his girlfriend, or she did over her boyfriend, and it almost showed his this or that, and then you have this highly entertainmentized, what a bad word that is, but you have this highly entertaining and deliberately highly entertaining news. At a certain point, who is to be able to tell the difference between what is news and putting up your picture of your girlfriend's butt on YouTube? How are we supposed to know? How are young people supposed to know what the hell the difference is?
Yeah, I agree with that. But we've got about 10 minutes here yet, and I do want to kind of go back to what is going on in Ferguson and what we had initially started the conversation about, and that is, we are seeing this sensationalized segments about what happened in Ferguson, and I kind of want to get at your opinion and your, I guess, prophecy, shall we say, to what we can expect to come out of what happened in Ferguson. Are we going to see change, or are we going to see it, well, it might a little bit, but maybe not a whole lot?
Part of the problem with the way the news cycle is today, and yeah, it's better to know more than less, I suppose, but once the focus, does anybody remember ISIS anymore? Does anybody remember the beheadings? Well, yes, we remember them, but does anybody think about how it made you feel 3 weeks ago? Does anybody remember how the Ebola scare prior to the elections made you feel? Nah, maybe not really. And I suspect that the problem that we have is things are coming at us so damned fast, and they change so much. Next week there might be, God forbid, a shooting in a high school somewhere, and then the focus will be that. And, I think that it allows this kind of speed and the rapidity with which we change our focus. We are highly ADD. We are attention deficited in this country to the point where we can't seem to stay on an issue long enough to say, okay, let's try to figure out what would the steps be to lessen the numbers of Ferguson situations ongoing. Would a GoPro help? Would certain kinds of police training help? Would a citizens advisory board help? In some communities, the police are okay with citizen advisory boards. In others, there's a lot of resistance. In some citizen advisory boards, you get people demagoguing it. Of course, it has problems. But the point is, whether it's a citizen advisory board or whether it's a GoPro, are the people in that community just waiting for the focus to change to something else so they can say, oh, thank God, business as usual?
You brought up a very good point there, Jonathan. So, let me toss this out to you. So, have we, given what is going on in Ferguson, given the fact that we're inundated with all these images, and like you said, 1 minute it might be a school shooting, 1 minute it might be Ebola, 1 minute it might be, an eruption in Gaza, or it might be some other turmoil in some other country. Are we, because of this, becoming desensitized to the core issues?
Oh, I think there's no question. I think that if a core issue, for example, is, let's say, a real core issue is the remarkable and increasing economic disparities in this country, where the middle class is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And you want to, let's say, make an ongoing case that the very, very rich really are missing a bet when they lose the middle, when they lose the middle class. Because if they lose the middle class, the people who buy goods on a regular basis begin to disappear. They begin to lessen in numbers, and that hurts everybody. But that is a bedrock kind of issue. And when you have a world where pictures are the big thing, where explosions are the big thing, and we are happy to be ADD and jump from one thing to the next and just get the latest new flashy thing, it makes it just so much more difficult to do what Bob is saying and to come together and figure out what are some of the core issues we really need to work on. And I want to tell you something else. People. What this also does is it feeds the ideological divide in Congress. Because the Congress people who go there who are liberal and the Congress people who go there who are much more conservative, they even know that they're going to get better numbers, better coverage in their local towns if the things that they say are more strident than conciliatory. And I mean this for my fellow liberals too, that if they get real in your face, they get the FaceTime on the TV, on the local news. Oh, well, our congressman, he really stood up for blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? Maybe what your congressman said was flat out stupid, but if he was screaming it, we're going to cover it. I think that hurts.
So here's my question to you then. How do we stem the tide from what we're seeing now and bring it back to the way it was several years ago, or are we well beyond that point?
I don't think that there's really any going back to the Edward R. Murrow's Huntley Brinkley way or Walter Cronkite way of delivering news. And we got to remember too that in his day, Walter Cronkite was considered on the right a leftist. So we it's not as if he was seen as utterly neutral, but he was certainly much less interested in the flash. I wonder. I would just leave it this way, that it's not at all clear to me that we can go back to a set of newsmen and newswomen who are willing to risk. See, what would have to happen is they'd have to have a corporation behind them willing to risk there not being Mr. or Ms. Flash in the pan. And I don't know if that happens anymore.
I definitely agree with that statement, because it seems that, they just want to sensationalize things, and that's not the way real news is. And, given the incidents in Ferguson, it's brought me, into this mindset of where did we go wrong? Where did we, as not only media, where did, as human beings, as a whole, we're told, over and over again, the Brown family, several other people, although there's a little bit of undercurrent there, which I'm not going to get into now, but, overall, they're told, look, we know things are going to get bad. We know there's a lot of frustration. We know there's a lot of anger, and all that. But we want you to, take this, resolve it in a peaceful manner, peaceful demonstrations. But then you get a few, and I'm going to leave it at that, a few who, decide, let's get on the 5 o'clock news. Let's get on world news tonight. Let's get on, meet the press. Let's get on this. And what you see then is this, you're inundated with these images of cars burning, buildings burning, people breaking windows. And I really believe that because of this influx of bad images, it is having an adverse effect. But we as journalists, we've got to be able to find some common ground to get this balance back.
Yeah, it's also an interesting point to make, I think, that if the news is what we think it is now, and I think we've described it very well, then in fact you could argue, could you not, that the people who are overturning cars know exactly how to reach people. Now, they may not be reaching people in ways that have any kind of long-term helping effect. But, you know, if you're really angry about what's happened in Ferguson, and you're a Ferguson resident, really, really upset and angry, knowing what's going on in our media lately, do you say, hi, media, I'm calling a meeting of young people here, and we're going to hammer out possible solutions to these terrible problems? Or do I know that I'm going to get my anger out there by throwing cars and overturning them and, you know, throwing rocks and stuff like that? I think in some ways the responses we're seeing that are so unfortunate are a direct response, an almost, I hate to say it this way, and I hope you all will know what I mean, it's almost an intelligent or savvy response to the kind of media that says, well, we're not going to cover a local community meeting about how to fix things with cops and citizens. Why would we want to cover that?
Yeah, I you know, in that way, I agree. We've got about a minute here yet, Jonathan, and I do want to get this one thing out, and I want to get your response to this. Is, you know, we are seeing through the media, like I said, we're being inundated with all these images of cars and buildings and all this burning. But you know what? The one thing is that I've noticed is you hear Al Sharpton, you hear others get up on podiums, they're talking peace, they're talking, you know, peaceful demonstrations. But what we don't hear is, this is my plan. This is what we are going to do. All we hear is we're going to talk about it. You know, what we are not, and we're hearing the same thing from Capitol Hill. I mean, it boils down to is, well, we're talking about it, but as people on the street, we are not hearing what they are going to do, what the policies are. You know.
Yeah, and again, I think they're responding to a world which would immediately turn on reruns of a hockey game if they were to be watching their local town council really get down in the dirt, so to speak, and hammer out some of these issues. How many of you would be interested in watching that when you've been hyped up to the point where you'd rather turn on your favorite hockey game rerun from 1987?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jonathan. You know, we got to get out of here, Jonathan, because coming up here a little bit is going to be Ed Till. I want you to stay on Skype for a couple of minutes. I'm going to be turning your mic volume down here. Everybody else, of course, it is time for me to get out of here. I'll be back Monday morning, 6 a.m. Stay tuned, because right after NPR News, the one, the only, Ed Till will be with you till 4 o'clock. See you Monday. Take care of yourselves.